So super excited to have Mira Imola from Observe Agency here today. Mira and I connected probably a year, 18 months ago, and instantly I think formed a bond in terms of our passion for design thinking and the way that it can be used in the profession. We've kept in contact, and it's just fantastic to have her on Australian soil here, all the way from Finland, to talk more to us around some of the exciting things that she's been doing and how she came to design thinking.
Thanks so much, Mel.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So I'll start off with a bit of a different question, I suppose. What skill would you like to have that you don't have?
Well, admittedly, I probably don't have a lot of skills, but one that along the way working in design and working with a lot of technologists that I would love to have is coding. I've been able to work with some amazing back-end and front-end coders, and just recently with this incredible German girl. She was 23 years old and she just brought our visions to life. And it's really a new language, you know. I'm bilingual, but to be able to also code and have that other language that's so relevant to the future, that's definitely a skill I'd love to have.
Fantastic. You can do something about that?
Maybe.
When you have time.
Maybe when I have time.
Fantastic. And my next question is around design thinking as well. What's your favourite part for you about using design thinking?
I've always been really interested in people and why they do things. So that initial phase of need finding, where you do the bunch of ethnographic research, interviewing focus groups, finding out what the challenge is that people face and getting to talk to real life people. I love that phase. In saying that, I do love the whole process. Building things and prototyping is a lot of fun. Just seeing what you can think of and quickly building a prototype, testing it along the way, and just seeing where you came from and what you end up with is always a really wonderful experience too.
So we've spoken before about how you came to design and that type of thing. Can you give us a bit of your journey? How did you come about?
Sure. So probably I haven't taken the most conventional path to becoming a designer. I would say I actually started off my career in law and I loved it. I've worked across government, private practice and in the public prosecutor's office. But along the way I've always been really interested in solving problems, really understanding clients, and I was looking for new ways to do things. And about 10 years ago now, I met a very handsome guy.
Who is now your husband?
Call my husband. And he was from the Nordics, and the Nordics are really known for their design skills. And he introduced me to design thinking, because previous to that I really thought that design was about form, how something looked and felt from an aesthetic point of view. But he introduced me to design thinking and I learned, no, design isn't just form, it's process and strategy. And along the way I decided to formalise my education. I did a wonderful program called Global Innovation by Design. It's a Stanford-based course, and I got to learn from some of the best professors in design thinking. Larry Leifer, he's actually been teaching the course for 50 years. The guy's 80 years old. So design thinking, it isn't new, but learning from people like that. And then I actually pivoted and worked as a designer, developing products and services for an airline, working in multidisciplinary teams, so the teams with people from all different countries and all different skills to create new products and services for this airline. And yeah, now I'm super lucky. I get to put both of my worlds together by using design in the law.
That's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so in terms of I think there are a lot of terms being thrown around about design at the moment. I know you use the term legal design as well. What other sorts of terms are you hearing? How it's been described?
Well, I think it's more about the fact that there are these different terms and each of them are slightly different to each other, but perhaps people don't necessarily understand the small nuances between them, if that makes sense. So design thinking, it's really this process of complex problem solving that designers originally used. Legal design, admittedly, I use that term out of respect for many of the academics who coined that term. So there's Helena Harpio, Stefania Passera, Margaret Hagan, and they really coined that term to describe the use of design thinking in the legal field. So I think that's why I like to use that term. But then there's user-centered design, human-centered design, and the differences there is user-centered design would be using that design approach but really focusing on the end user, and human-centered would be taking into account all the different humans involved in the process. So there are a lot of different terms, each slightly different to the other, but in essence have the same framework and philosophy.
Fantastic. So when I speak about, or for me, the main parts about design thinking before we go into the process side of it, I see it very much grounded in empathy, collaboration and experimentation.
Yeah.
Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say they're some of the core pillars that we have there. I think there's also a lot of attitudes that the design thinking process advocates for that aren't necessarily embedded in a lot of different industries, especially those that are a bit more hierarchical and rigid. Law, for example, traditionally. So they're things like tolerance for making mistakes, this whole concept of fail fast, iterate often or iterate quickly, and they can feel quite foreign and scary initially, but they really are proven to be the way forward if you want to create something good. And then the other thing is that whole thing about embracing ambiguity.
Yes.
You know how at the start of using, at the start of any process using design thinking, you don't know what that end outcome's going to be. And that is quite a scary thing to think about, particularly from a business point of view, you know, and making a business case. Hey, let's spend this much money. What are you going to create? We don't know yet.
Yeah.
You know?
We don't know what it's going to look like. How can you not know what it's going to look like?
Exactly.
For me, my personal journey with design thinking was very much about that too, because I assumed that I was a bit more creative and a bit more broad thinking in terms of that sort of thing. And I can remember sort of thinking all of a sudden how easy it was for me to jump to a solution and not realise I was jumping to a solution. But that I love that phrase, you need to sit with the ambiguity to get the end result.
Absolutely.
And it's not something that comes easily to us when you're legally trained.
No, I don't think so. And perhaps even just based in the world that we live in now, everything is so immediate. You know, I want to know the answer to this, I can find it straight away. So I would say as humans, it is just maybe becoming more difficult, or you have to be more conscious of being able to sit there and say, hang on, maybe this first idea isn't the right idea. It's okay to not know what's going to happen at the end, but if we go through this design process, which has been proven to work, and have faith in that, what we're going to end up with is something that will be truly engaging and user-centric, efficient for business, and hopefully innovative too. Yeah.
Let's jump to some examples.
Okay.
I think one of the misconceptions I hear about design thinking too is everyone just assumes that it's sprints and people have these sort of hackathons and come up with ideas and design think it and brainstorm, and then that nothing actually tangible happens.
Yeah.
And I know that that's far from being true, because I see some amazing design thinking based projects sort of culminated in some really great products and offerings and services and processes. Tell me about some of your projects and how you've used design thinking.
Okay. Well, our projects really do focus in the legal sector and using design there. We've worked with on a range of different projects, from big companies to law firms to government actually now, and that's been a really interesting space. And the projects really do differ as well. Sometimes, for example, law firms initially have been very interested in looking at design thinking in terms of form. You know, how can we create better contracts? So there's already a bit of this end idea in mind, but then when you go through this process, people start to realize, oh, actually the way our team works is now different. The way we actually start to cross-collaborate with the business and maybe the graphic designers and maybe HR to create this solution is different.
Using the multidisciplines.
Absolutely. So, for example, if I talk about one project that I worked on in arbitration, that was really wonderful. Arbitration, as you know, it's a really well-reputed form of dispute resolution, but it's also very complex and it's quite hard to understand from the outset. And the Finnish Arbitration Institute, they've been really innovative in their approach to arbitration, and we're looking at a new way to help their key stakeholders explain, communicate, and go through the arbitration process. So their key stakeholders are, of course, lawyers who represent their clients, business people, usually general counsel and business teams in big companies, and then a business person. So what they started off with were essentially, if someone wanted to know how to go through the arbitration process, they'd get a 50-page book, with all the rules. It was just the arbitration rules. Or then you'd have to go to their website, and it was very hard to locate the different information. You know how it is on websites. You spend so much time just trying to find the information you're looking for. So what we did is of course, I think the difference using design thinking with law is that there needs to be that legal expertise there. There is a certain limitation in place because you can't be compromising the legal validity of a solution, So it's really important that lawyers do take a part in it. So that was...
Yeah, working out, and someone else mentioned that before, with that idea, we were talking about that idea of actually making sure that you still got the integrity of the legal content in the document, but then having enough, I suppose, being brave enough to understand what doesn't need to be in it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So starting off from there, and then we went through a series of workshops with the stakeholders to ask them what phases of the arbitration process are important to you, what information do you need to know. So obviously lawyers, they want to know, I want to know which section of the Act refers to X, Y, Z. But very interestingly, General Counsel were like, I need to know my timeframes, I want to know when I need to be present, I need to know when we need to file things, I want to know how much it costs. Pretty much that's all I care about, because the rest I hand over to my lawyers. So so there are a few things. Business people were similar to General Counsel there. And we created a whole new flow and representation of this it went down from 50 pages to about 4-page wireframe. And we thought, okay, this will be great. And then from there, when we went and did the validation workshop, the stakeholder said, why is this in paper? This has to be digital. And so, it's things like that where you're constantly listening to the people who will be using the solution and adapting to that. So then, of course, we brought technologists on board, and it's this really great interactive tool which you can now see on the Finland arbitration website, and it's garnered a lot of great recognition for them in their field.
Yes, that's fantastic. And I love that what you're talking about too, that idea of technology. Technology obviously has a big part to play, I think, with design thinking, but it has to come after you've gone through that research phase, that empathy phase, that define those other phases. It's an enabler. It can be one of the solutions, but not the driver necessarily. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Absolutely. It's a tool, and it's a tool that can be used to realise the right idea, but not the right idea doesn't necessarily harness technology. More and more likely it will, just because of the digital nature of the world we live in, but it shouldn't necessarily be the first option.
Great. And so are there any, with the projects that you've worked on, that type of thing, any results that you've got that have been a surprise to you, or that you think you wouldn't have got had you not used design thinking way of approaching it?
Well, I think for me, having worked in design for quite some time, I actually go into most projects really open-minded, saying, okay, let's see how things go. But definitely for the people I get to collaborate with, it's really interesting to see what they say. And a lot of the time, it comes down to the fact that they would have never imagined the solution that we created in the end.
I hear that all the time. I love it. It's sort of like, I can't believe that we've come up with this and that this process has got us there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited at the moment, just quickly talking about government. The EU is putting in a new directive about web accessibility. So in 4 years' time, pretty much most retail services that operate online, such as banks, e-commerce platforms, insurance, need to be accessible to all. So irrespective of literacy, understandings, dyslexia, sight, hearing. And that's been really amazing to work alongside the Finnish government at the moment. So we're working on a lot of these initiatives with them to how we can communicate this EU directive to the people who need to implement it, and then what sort of solutions would actually tick the boxes to actually satisfy and ensure that everyone can access information as our world becomes more digital. I think
when we think about what design thinking is about, improving the experience and the user experience, that's just incredible.
And this ability to have impact from a social perspective as well, because the law, it's law is about empowerment, really. So it's great. I think design thinking is very well suited to law in that respect too.
Fantastic. So, if you were to, it's a lot, I know there are a lot of practical tips that you give because you've lived this for a long time, but if you were giving tips to people who were just starting out on their design thinking journey, what would you say?
Well, everyone had to start somewhere. So definitely read. And I think that's always a good place to start. There are some amazing authors, Tom and David Kelly from IDEO, Creative Confidence. It's a nice book to start with. I would then also say to talk to people who work in the industry, to understand the projects they do, understand the process they went through, and then, of course, learn by doing. So try and get involved in a project that uses design thinking, or if you can't get involved in a project, create one yourself. That's how I think they're good tips.
Absolutely, and the learn by doing, the whole prototyping thing sits so well with design thinking, but totally with you there, Mira, because that whole idea of actually getting in and doing it.
Yeah.
And you find it easier once you've done it. You sort of change your mindset and you can get in and do it, and it's so much easier.
And what I've found, and probably you have found too, Mel, is design thinking, it's actually quite difficult to grasp when you just talk about it. And everyone can say, oh, we've got to be empathetic. Everyone can say, oh, yes, I should prototype something. Oh, we should ideate and not judge ideas and include people from different backgrounds. We can all say it, but for me, when the light bulb moment happened was when I first started doing it, because then you actually get to see how powerful the process is for yourself. So I like to encourage people to just do.
And I think the other thing that's come out when speaking with a lot of people too is that idea that it doesn't have to be by the letter. You can make design thinking work, or any methodology work, for how you want to work, how your organisation works, or how you want to work personally. You don't have to actually do it by the letter. You make it your own. I think you can bolt on other types of ways of agile to it or whatever. You can make it your own.
Without a doubt. And I think it would be a fallacy almost to say that this is a one size fits all and this is the approach and this is how it must be done, because that's not necessarily the case at all. I think thinking about projects that I've worked on with global companies, we may go through a design process, for example, to break down silos between legal teams and the business units. So this is more about process change here, using design thinking to increase conversations and increase relationships between people. And the method that we would roll out in the American or UK offices would not be the right fit for their Chinese offices, and that comes down to cultural context as well. So, and power difference. There's different hierarchy levels and different cultural norms. So, no, design thinking always needs to be, the process needs to be tweaked given the industry, given the country you're in, many different factors. Yeah.
And so you're well placed, being in Finland and the centre of design at the moment, to talk about what you think the future of design thinking in the legal industry or profession is. Where do you think it's going?
Well, right now, I think people are still they're still starting to understand the value of design greater than form. I think we're still at quite a nascent stage where the legal industry or legal professionals, maybe I shouldn't say the legal industry, but maybe legal professionals are starting to move away from understanding design as just making a contract look pretty, Yes. So I think it's going to be a slow but steady progression. Hopefully soon we'll see people using design in the processes and then finally strategically. So I would really love to see more design-led law firms. But that, like you're championing, of course, but it will take time. It takes a lot of mindset change. It takes buy-in from both top and bottom levels, and it does take lawyers. Lawyers also need to be able to understand that to embrace a design mindset, it may not just be lawyers who can make that change. You need to work hand in hand with designers and with tech people and psychologists and researchers. And it's for a design-led law firm, the lawyer would not necessarily be in the centre of it. And that's very much true to not just law firms of the future, but organisations of the future. We live in a world where problems are so much more complex. It is impossible for someone to have every answer to every question, you know.
Couldn't agree more. That's a fantastic note to end on, apart from one other thing that I want to ask you to do. But no, I couldn't agree more with you on that too, that whole idea. And what I'm really excited about for the future of design is moving into that idea of assisting clients with the strategic process, not just processes, but even advice and the way that we work that, and bring in other disciplines, but also bring in a much more creative and design-led way of doing that. Very exciting. So my last task for you, Mira, is to complete, and I've got Post-its and Sharpie here.
Fun.
Fun. Is to complete this sentence for me, which is, to me, design thinking means that the legal profession is less something. And more something, which can only mean an improved experience for everyone. So what should it be less of, and what should it be more of?
Oh, that's quite tricky. Perhaps less rigid, more dynamic.
Love it.
Should I write that down?
You didn't have to think for very long at all. Yes, write that down, please. That's me. Less rigid and more dynamic.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
I have messy writing.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you so much. And the plant is the perfect place.
Oh,
that. Look at that. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your stay in Australia. Great to have you back, and come back again and see us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Mel.
Great.